Master Sergeant Cole Harrington grabbed her by the collar in front of 1,200 eyes and said, "I will end your career before lunch." He had done it before, to others, in other rooms, and every single time silence followed, because silence was the price of survival around a man who confused a rank with a right. But this time the woman he grabbed did not flinch. She looked him dead in the eye and said quietly, "Let go." He didn't, so she made him. If you've never seen a legend collapse in real time, stay with me and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. The morning Madison Rourke arrived at Fort Carver, the fog was still sitting low across the parade ground, and the base smelled the way every large installation does. Before the world wakes up, diesel exhaust, mess hall coffee, and something close to tension. She had driven 6 hours through the night from her office in San Diego, and she had not slept. Not because she couldn't, but because every time she closed her eyes, she saw the face of Emily Carter, a 23-year-old intelligence specialist with a voice so quiet during their recorded interview that Madison had to lean forward just to hear her and Emily's voice saying the same words over and over. "He told me no one would believe me. He said his record was too clean. He said my word was worth nothing against his." Madison had heard variations of that speech 9 times in 4 months. 9 different people. 9 different moments when Cole Harrington had decided that his rank was a kind of armor, not just against accountability, but against the basic rules that every other soldier was expected to live by. She parked her vehicle near the administrative annex, pulled her jacket straight, checked that her recording device was clipped firmly inside her left breast pocket, and told herself the same thing she told herself before every confrontation that mattered: stay flat, don't perform anger. Let him do that part. She was 41 years old and had been doing this work investigating misconduct inside military and federal institutions for 11 years. Before that, she had served 8 years in Army intelligence. She understood the architecture of power, insulated a large installation, the way an experienced carpenter understands the frame of a house before the walls go up. She could feel where the stress points were. She could see, just by watching how people moved around a man, whether they were drawn to him or afraid of him. With Cole Harrington, she had watched 3 separate video recordings of base events, a unit ceremony, a training review, a charity dinner, and what she saw was not admiration. Not entirely. What she saw was the particular stillness that comes over people when they are near someone who has shown in small and private moments that he is willing to hurt. Her contact on base was Captain Denise Alvarez, a serious short-haired logistics officer who had been quietly forwarding Madison internal paperwork for 2 months and who met her now at the side entrance of the administrative building, coffee in hand, looking like she had not slept either. "He knows something is happening," Alvarez said without preamble. "Someone talked. I don't know who, but he's been different the last 3 days. More controlled, more public." "More public how?" Madison asked. "He's been eating in the main dining hall every morning. Full uniform, sitting at the center table, making sure he's seen being decent, helping junior enlisted carry trays. That kind of thing." Alvarez looked at her steadily. "He's performing." Madison absorbed this. It was not the first time she had watched a subject become suddenly visible and conspicuously generous when they sensed an investigation closing in. It was, in fact, a reliable indicator that the subject understood what was coming and was building a counter-narrative in real time. "Good," she said. Alvarez raised an eyebrow. "Good. The more witnesses, the better. If he's put himself in the center of a room full of people, that works for me." She had not told Alvarez exactly what she planned to do that morning. Not because she didn't trust her, she did within limits, but because the fewer people who knew her specific approach, the less chance Harrington had of redirecting it. What Madison knew from 11 years of this work was that men like Cole Harrington were most honest when they were surprised. When the familiar script they had used for years, the one where their rank walked into the room first and everyone else rearranged themselves accordingly, stopped working. That was when the real person showed up. And that was exactly the moment she needed to be there to document. She thanked Alvarez, declined the coffee, and walked toward the main dining hall. It was 6:47 in the morning, and there were already close to 400 soldiers moving through the facility, some eating, some standing in line, some passing through on their way to morning formation. The dining hall at Fort Carver was enormous, one of those institutional spaces that manages to feel both crowded and impersonal at the same time, with long rows of tables and the particular acoustics of a room where hundreds of people are talking simultaneously and none of them above a certain volume. Madison stood near the entrance for 30 seconds and found him in less than 10. Cole Harrington was impossible to miss, and not only because of his size, though he was genuinely large, 6 feet 2, 230 pounds of the particular kind of muscle that comes from 22 years of special operations training, the kind that doesn't soften when you're not actively working. He was sitting at the dead center of the room, as Alvarez had said, in full dress uniform, his posture perfectly correct, his expression open and relaxed. He was listening to something a younger soldier was saying to him with what appeared to be genuine attention. He laughed at something. Several soldiers nearby glanced over, reassured by the laugh. He looked to anyone who hadn't read 9 Testimonies like exactly the kind of man young soldiers dreamed of becoming. Madison walked toward him. She did not move quickly, and she did not move as though she was approaching a superior officer. She moved the way she always moved, directly without performance. And when she was close enough that he would have to acknowledge her, if he looked up, she stopped and said, "Master Sergeant Harrington, my name is Madison Rourke. I'm a federal special investigator. I'd like a few minutes of your time." The table went quiet. Not just the soldiers immediately around Harrington, a wider ripple of quiet spread out from the center of the room, the way sound travels when something unexpected happens. Heads turned, conversations paused. Harrington looked up at her slowly. He was very good at this, the slow look, the unhurried blink, the deliberate way. He took his time deciding whether someone was worth a response. It was a dominant signal that he had been using for so long it had become unconscious. "Investigator," he said, not a question, just the words set down between them like a card on a table. "That's right. You have a badge." She produced it and held it where he could see it without taking a step closer to him. He looked at it for long enough to communicate that he was not impressed, and then looked back at her face. "I'm having breakfast," he said. "I understand. I can wait or I can ask my questions now. Either way is fine with me." Something shifted in his face, then something brief and controlled, like a door closing behind a very small wind. He had expected her to be apologetic, deferential. He had expected her to say something along the lines of, "I'm sorry to interrupt," or "Whenever you're ready, sir." The fact that she had not, the fact that she had offered him the choice without any softening around it, landed differently than he had anticipated. He set down his fork. "What questions?" Questions related to several formal complaints filed by members of this unit over the past 3 years. "I'm conducting a review of how those complaints were handled and by whom." Another silence, longer this time. The soldiers at the nearby tables had stopped pretending not to listen. "Those complaints," Harrington said, "were reviewed and closed." "Yes, I'm aware of that. I'm reviewing the review." One of the soldiers at Harrington's table, a young staff sergeant, maybe 26, 27, glanced between them with the expression of someone watching a chess game and trying to figure out who was ahead. Harrington leaned back slightly in his chair. He spread his hands flat on the table in a gesture that was meant to read as openness and patience, but that Madison recognized, because she had seen it before, as the physical positioning of a man deciding whether to escalate. "I have a record that speaks for itself," he said. "Most people do," she said. "I'm interested in the parts it doesn't speak to. I don't know what you think you're going to find here, investigator, but I've been doing this for 22 years. I've served in 3 combat theaters. I've been reviewed, evaluated, and commended by officers whose careers you could spend a lifetime trying to equal. Whatever someone has told you, I'd rather hear what you have to tell me," she said. "That's the purpose of an interview." He stared at her. Around them, the dining hall had developed a particular texture of quiet, the kind where people are pretending to resume their conversations, but are actually listening with everything they have. "Not here," he said, "wherever you're comfortable." He stood up. He was very tall from a standing position, and Madison was 5 feet 6, and she knew this was a deliberate choice. The decision to stand to use the full advantage of his physical size in a room full of witnesses. She had seen it before. She didn't step back. "I'll give you 20 minutes, he said, "in the conference room down the hall, and then I'm done." "That's completely your right," she said. He walked past her toward the door. She fell into step, neither behind him nor beside him, just parallel, equidistant, as if they had arrived together. 2 or 3 soldiers near the door saw them coming and moved aside. The conference room was standard military, 1 rectangular table, 8 chairs, a whiteboard, a clock on the wall. Harrington sat at the head of the table, a choice so automatic she suspected he didn't even notice he'd made it, and she sat 3 seats down on the side angled slightly toward him and set her phone on the table face up. "I'm recording this conversation," she said. "You have the right to have a representative present. Do you want to pause while you contact?" "No," he said. "Are you certain?" I said no. She nodded and pressed record. For the next 12 minutes, what happened was a conversation that sounded on the surface like a formal interview. She asked structured questions about specific dates, specific complaints, specific names. He answered in the tone of a man who had answered these kinds of questions before and found them tedious, direct, complete, occasionally slightly condescending, but technically cooperative. He was good at this. He had clearly thought about how to respond to exactly this kind of inquiry. But Madison was not listening only to his answers. She was watching the gap between what he said and how he held his body while saying it. She was watching what he did with his hands when she mentioned Emily Carter's name, a very slight stilling, like something caught, in what he did with his jaw when she mentioned the date of the first complaint, which was 18 months before the record showed it being officially received. He pressed his back teeth together for half a second. It was not much. It was everything. "The complaint from Specialist Carter was received on March 14th of last year," she said. "But Specialist Carter told me she filed it on September 9th of the year before. That's a gap of almost 7 months. Can you tell me what happened during that time?" He looked at her very steadily. "Administrative delays happen. This is a large installation. 7 months is a significant administrative delay. Paperwork gets lost, it gets misfiled. I wasn't involved in the administrative process. But you were aware of the complaint's contents before it was formally received. I have testimony indicating that." His jaw did the thing again. "I don't know who told you that. I'm not required to share that with you at this stage." "Then I don't know how to respond to speculation." "It's not speculation," she said. "It's testimony, specifically testimony from 2 people who were present when you discussed the complaint's contents with another officer several months before it appeared in the formal record." He said nothing for a full 4 seconds. Madison counted them internally the way she always did, 1, 2, 3, 4, and let the silence sit completely untouched. Then he said, "People misremember things." "Sometimes," she said. "Would you like to tell me what you remember about that conversation?" "I don't remember a specific conversation. About a complaint made by a specialist in your unit. I interact with a lot of people in this unit. I don't keep records of every conversation I have." "That's understandable." She made a note. "Let me ask you about something different. The formal complaint from Corporal Brooks, the one filed in February of last year. In the complaint, Brooks describes a specific incident in the motor pool. He says that after he raised a concern about safety procedures in your presence, you pulled him aside privately and told him, and I'm quoting the complaint directly, that any further complaints would be dealt with at the unit level, and that his performance reviews would reflect his attitude. Do you remember that conversation?" The temperature in the room dropped about 5 degrees without actually changing. Harrington said no. "You don't remember it?" "I don't remember saying anything remotely like that. Brooks had performance issues that were well documented before that complaint was filed. If he believes that any feedback he received from me was retaliatory, he's wrong. When you say he's wrong, flat, final. He has it documented," she said, "in a personal journal, written the same evening." Something happened in his eyes that she had learned to recognize over 11 years, the moment when a person who has been managing a conversation realizes that the conversation has information in it that they did not know existed. It was a particular kind of recalibration, visible only for a second or two before the mask came back. "A personal journal," he said, "is not a legal document." "No, but combined with testimony from 2 other individuals who describe similar interactions, it establishes a pattern. That's what I'm interested in, the pattern." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said slowly and deliberately, "Miss Rourke, I don't know what you think you're building here, but I want to be very clear about something. I have served this country for 22 years. I have a record that has been reviewed at every level of this organization and found consistently to be exemplary. Whatever story someone is trying to tell about me, whatever version of events they've sold you, I want you to understand that my record, my rank, and my service will speak louder than anything you think you've gathered in a 4-month investigation." He leaned forward. "Remember whose file you are reading before you decide whose version of reality you believe." She looked at him and said calmly, "I remember whose file I'm reading. That's exactly why I'm here. He stood up. This interview is over. You have that right, she said. I may need to speak with you again. Please don't leave the installation without notifying. I know my rights, he said and walked out. She sat in the silence of the conference room for a moment after he left, let out one slow breath and then pressed stop on the recording. She looked at her notes. She looked at the clock. It was 7:31 in the morning. She picked up her phone and called Alvarez. He just ended the interview, she said. How did it go? About how I expected. She paused. He's going to be in that dining hall again at lunch, making sure he's seen. Probably. I need you to do something for me. I need you to find out whether there is any event, any formation, any scheduled gathering that puts the maximum number of people in one location this afternoon. A pause on the other end. Then there's a unit readiness review at 1400 in the main assembly hall, mandatory for all active personnel. It's a big one. They have been coordinating in it for 3 weeks. How many people? North of 1,000. Could be closer to 1,200. Madison said, perfect. She spent the next 5 hours working. This was the part of investigations that no one ever saw, not the confrontation, not the formal hearing, not the moment when everything finally became visible, but the hours before all of that, when someone sat alone with documents and testimony and tried to build something solid enough to stand under the weight of what was coming. She reviewed the 9 testimonies again, cross-referencing dates, looking for the places where different accounts touched the same event. She had Daniel Brooks's journal entries, 12 pages in his own handwriting, that a staff judge advocate friend had helped her determine were admissible as corroborating evidence. She had security footage timestamps that contradicted what Harrington had told her this morning about his location on a specific date. She had a statement from a senior NCO, a man who had served alongside Harrington for 6 years and who had given his account only after being told that others had already spoken, who had looked at her across a table in a hotel conference room in San Diego and said quietly and with what seemed like genuine relief, I've been waiting for someone to ask. She built the file, she organized it, she cross-indexed it, and then she thought about what Alvarez had said, that Harrington had sensed something was coming and had responded by making himself more visible, more public, more conspicuously decent. She understood this strategy. She also understood its flaw. The same instinct that made Cole Harrington perform decency in front of large audiences was the same instinct that, when pushed past a certain point, collapsed into what it had always been underneath the absolute bone-deep certainty that his rank meant he could not be touched. She had seen it before in other investigations with other powerful people. The performance held exactly as long as they believed they were controlling the narrative. The moment they felt that control slip, the moment they realized the room was no longer operating according to the rules they had always applied to it, the performance cracked. She knew exactly how to crack it. At 1:10 in the afternoon, she walked back across Fort Carver toward the main assembly hall, and the sun was fully up now and the fog was completely gone, and the bass was loud with the particular noise of a large installation in full daily operation, trucks and voices, and the distant rhythmic sound of something mechanical she couldn't identify. She passed a group of junior enlisted soldiers who looked at her with the wariness that people on military installations always direct at civilians in professional clothing, and she nodded at them the way she always did, not performing friendliness, just acknowledging presence, and kept walking. Major Rebecca Lawson met her outside the assembly hall. Lawson was a compact woman in her late 30s, with the direct eyes of someone who had long since decided that honesty was more efficient than its alternatives. Madison had spoken with her twice before, once by phone, once in person, and had found her to be exactly the kind of officer who understood that protecting an institution sometimes meant being willing to hold the institution accountable. Lawson had not been involved in the cover-up of the complaints. She had been, in fact, the officer who had first flagged the 7-month gap to her own superior and been told officially that it was an administrative anomaly and not her concern. It had become Madison's concern instead. He's inside, Lawson said. Front section. He got here early. Of course he did. There are 1,143 people in that room, Lawson said. Madison nodded. Are you sure about this? Lawson asked. Not cautious, just direct. No, Madison said, but I'm going in anyway. And she walked through the doors into the noise and heat and accumulated presence of more than 1,000 people, and she found Cole Harrington exactly where she expected to find him, visible, positioned, performing, and she started across the floor toward him. And the only thought in her head, precise and clear, was, this is the moment he finds out that his rank only works on people who are willing to let it. She was 15 feet away when he saw her, and what crossed his face in that instant before the mask came back, before he straightened and composed himself and became again, the image of the decorated soldier with 22 years of service, was something that Madison had learned to recognize as more valuable than any testimony, any document, any timestamp in a security log. It was fear, not physical fear, not the fear of being hurt, the fear of being known. She kept walking. She was 15 feet away, and he had already seen her and already decided how to handle it. And Madison could read the decision forming in real time across his face, the way you can read weather coming across flat ground, the straightening of the spine, the slight expansion of the chest, the lift of the chin that added half an inch to his already considerable height. Cole Harrington had spent 22 years perfecting the art of filling a room, and right now, with 1,100 soldiers at his back and an investigator walking toward him across an open floor, he deployed every bit of it. He turned to face her fully. He crossed his arms. He waited. She didn't stop walking until she was 6 feet from him, close enough that anyone nearby could hear clearly, far enough that there was no question she was choosing the distance deliberately. We weren't finished, she said. I told you this morning, he said, his voice carrying the particular projection of someone trained to be heard across a field. That conversation was over. The conversation you chose to end, yes, but the investigation isn't. Around them, the ambient noise of 1,100 people settling into position had dropped measurably in a ring that kept expanding the longer they stood there. It was the acoustic phenomenon of collective attention. When enough people focus on the same point, the surrounding sound drains toward it, like water finding a drain. Several soldiers near Harrington had stopped moving entirely. A staff sergeant 3 feet to his left was staring at Madison with the expression of someone who had just realized they were standing very close to something historic. You want to do this here, Harrington said, not a question. I want to ask you about something that didn't come up this morning, she said. A name. This is not the time or the place. I'd like you to tell me about First Lieutenant Andrea Simmons. The name landed the way she knew it would. She had saved it specifically for this moment, not for the morning interview, where he would have had privacy and time to construct a careful answer, but for here in this room in front of this many witnesses, where his face would have to respond before his mind could redirect it. Something happened in his face that was not quite a flinch, but was close enough that the staff sergeant 3 feet away noticed it and looked quickly at the floor. I don't see what Lieutenant Simmons has to do with. She filed a complaint 14 months ago, Madison said. It was the third complaint in 4 years involving personnel under your direct command. It was never formally entered into your record. I'd like to understand why. The ring of silence around them had grown to include, by her rough estimate, 200 people who were no longer pretending to do anything other than listen. Harrington uncrossed his arms. Ms. Rourke, he said, lowering his voice to a register he clearly intended to be private. You are disrupting a mandatory unit readiness review. This is not the setting for an investigative interview. If you continue this, I will have you removed. That's your right, she said at full volume, and it will be documented. He stared at her. From somewhere behind Madison, a voice said quietly but distinctly, "Holy," and then stopped. Major Lawson, who had positioned herself along the left wall, where she had a clear sight line to both of them, did not move. First Sergeant Thomas Keller, standing near the back entrance, was watching with both hands in his pockets in an expression of controlled attention. This was the moment. Madison knew it, and so did Harrington. He was being given a choice in front of 1,100 witnesses, and both options were bad for him: engage and reveal himself, or retreat and let the room see him retreat. She had engineered this specifically not to humiliate him, not as a performance of her own authority, but because she understood something fundamental about how accountability worked inside institutions like this one. It did not happen in closed conference rooms. It happened when enough witnesses were present that the event could not be quietly revised into something else afterward. I want, Harrington said, spacing each word carefully, to speak with you privately. Now, I'd prefer to continue here. I am not asking. I understand that. She didn't move. His voice dropped another register. Do you know what I can do to an investigation like yours? Do you know who I know at the command level? You walk in here with 4 months of paperwork and someone's personal journal, and you think that, I think, she said calmly, that you just told me you're aware of the specific contents of my investigative file, which you shouldn't be, which means you have a contact in or near the reviewing office, and I'd like to know who that is. Dead silence from Harrington, the kind that comes not from composure, but from a mind moving very fast behind a suddenly still face. She had not known that for certain. She had suspected it, the specific nature of his composure that morning, the fact that he had seemed to anticipate certain questions without being told they were coming, but she had not had proof. What she had just done was offer him a piece of information, the journal, the 4-month timeline, and watch whether he handled it like a man who was hearing it for the first time or like a man who already knew it. He had known it. His face told her that before his next word. I have nothing further to say to you, he said. That's fine, but I want you to understand something. She held his gaze. Every person in this room has just seen this conversation. Every person has heard you reference the specific details of a confidential investigation. That conversation is already part of the record. Whether you speak to me further or not, that part is already done. Harrington looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he did something she had not entirely anticipated. He smiled. Not a warm smile, a cold, functional one, the kind that carries a message instead of an emotion. You're very good at this, he said. I'll give you that. I'm not trying to be good at anything, she said. I'm trying to find out what happened to 9 people who filed complaints that went nowhere. 9 people, he repeated. Something shifted in his tone, not quite contempt, but something adjacent. 9 people out of a unit of 300. You want to know what I think those 9 people have in common? They couldn't handle the standard. They found a way to make their personal failures into someone else's problem. That is what I have spent 22 years watching happen to the military, the slow accommodation of people who can't carry their weight, finding someone else to blame. Several people nearby shifted uncomfortably. Madison noticed 2 junior soldiers exchange a glance. Emily Carter, she said, 23 years old, top 15% of her intelligence specialist cohort, commendation from her previous commander. She couldn't handle the standard. She had performance issues in this unit. Performance issues that appeared according to her file 3 weeks after she rejected a request from a senior officer. 3 weeks, Master Sergeant. The timing is in the documents. Correlation is not causation. He said it smoothly, like someone who had prepared that phrase. You're right, she said. That's why I have 11 other data points. The smile left his face. The performance reviews of 7 soldiers who filed or supported complaints in this unit show a documented pattern of negative evaluation, beginning within 30 days of the complaint or support. 7, all under your command or in units where you held informal advisory authority. The statistical probability of that being coincidental is less than 1%. I had an analyst run the numbers twice. She paused. That's not correlation. That's a pattern. Harrington took 1 step toward her. It was not a large step, and it was not fast, but it was deliberate, and it closed the distance between them from 6 feet to 4, and the room registered it the way rooms always register physical escalation, with an inhalation that nobody quite completed. Who do you think you are, he said, quietly now. The control was back, or the performance of it was, but underneath the control, there was something else, something that had been building since that morning when she had first refused to be deferential. You come onto my base. You interrupt a mandatory formation. You make accusations in front of my soldiers. You have any idea what kind of damage you can do to unit cohesion, to morale, to the confidence of every person in this room who has looked up to me? That's a serious concern, she said. It's also the exact concern that was used to suppress every complaint in your file. Unit cohesion, morale, the confidence of the institution. Every time someone tried to speak up, those were the words that made them go quiet. She let that sit for half a second. The confidence of the institution has to be in the truth, not in protecting one person's record. Someone behind her exhaled, audible. Not a reaction to discomfort, but to something landing. Harrington's jaw shifted. She knew that tell by now. Thomas Keller, she said, raising her voice slightly, is here today as a witness representative. Major Rebecca Lawson is here as my institutional contact. Both have reviewed the preliminary evidence file. If you'd like, the formal hearing will follow standard JAG proceedings. But I need you to understand something, Master Sergeant, and I need the people in this room to understand it too because they deserve to. She looked around once briefly, then back at him. This investigation is not about you being a SEAL. It is not about your combat record. It is not about anything you have ever done right. It is about what happened to 9 people inside this institution, on this base, under this command structure, who did everything they were supposed to do and were told in different ways by different people that their safety and dignity mattered less than your comfort. The silence was absolute now. Not the natural quiet of a room that size. This was the applied silence of more than 1,000 people collectively holding something very still. Harrington looked at her. She could see him calculating the options, the costs, the angles. She could see him reading the room, checking the faces of soldiers he had worked with for years, looking for the familiar alignment that his rank had always produced. He didn't find it this time. Not entirely. There were soldiers in this room who still believed in him and would go on believing because people do not discard 22 years of institutional trust in 8 minutes. But enough faces had gone neutral, enough eyes had found the floor. Enough of the silent architecture of his authority had shifted that he could feel it happening. And for a man who had built his entire identity on the absolute certainty of that architecture, feeling it move must have been something close to physical. He said very quietly, "You'll regret this." She looked at him steadily. "Is that a threat?" He didn't answer. "Because if it is," she said, "I want you to know it's been recorded, and I want you to know that it's the kind of statement that would be very difficult to explain in a formal proceeding." He held her gaze for 4 seconds, 5, 6. Then he turned and walked toward the side exit of the assembly hall. I didn't run. He walked with his full height and his full bearing, and the controlled deliberateness of a man who wanted the room to believe he was choosing to leave. But the room had been watching. The room knew the difference between leaving on your own terms and leaving because you had run out of moves. The side door closed behind him. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the room exhaled all 1,100 people more or less at once, and the ambient noise came back, but it came back different, changed in register. The particular buzz of a large group that has just witnessed something they will be talking about for a long time. Madison stood where she was for 5 seconds. Then she turned and walked toward Major Lawson. He referenced the file, Lawson said quietly when she got close. The specific contents. Yes, that means someone told him. Yes, and I need to know who. That's the next piece. She glanced at the side door. He's not running. He thinks he still has control of this. Does he? Madison considered the question. She thought about the way the room had felt in the last 30 seconds before he left. The faces she had seen, the particular neutral expression of soldiers who had been told for years what to think about this man and were now for the first time not being told. Less than he did this morning, she said. That's enough for now. But she was already thinking past this moment, past the assembly hall and the 1,100 witnesses and the recording running in her left breast pocket. She was thinking about Andrea Simmons, the name she had dropped into the room like a stone into still water, and the ripple it had produced in Harrington's face. She was thinking about why that name specifically out of all 9 cases had produced the deepest reaction. She had included Simmons in her file, but Simmons had not yet spoken to her directly. Simmons had declined 2 interview requests politely and without explanation, and Madison had not pushed. She had decided to wait until there was more leverage. The way Harrington's face had moved when that name landed told her she had not yet found everything there was to find in that case. Something about Simmons was worse than what was in the file. Something had happened that had not been documented, and Harrington knew exactly what it was. She found Daniel Brooks near the back of the room, standing with 2 other junior soldiers who looked at her with expressions somewhere between curiosity and barely suppressed respect. Brooks was 24 with steady dark eyes and the slight permanent tension in his shoulders of someone who had spent a long time waiting for something bad to happen. He had testified on a recorded call 3 months ago, and Madison had spent 40 minutes with him, and at the end he had said, "I didn't think anyone was actually going to do anything." He had not said it with bitterness. He had said it with the simple, exhausted honesty of someone who had genuinely stopped believing. "How are you doing?" she asked him. "I don't know yet," he said. He paused, searching. "I didn't know it would feel like that." Like what? He thought about it seriously the way young people do when they haven't yet learned to reach for the easy word. Like the room got bigger, he said finally. Does that make sense? Yes, she said, and it does. She spent the next 90 minutes inside the installation, moving carefully. She found First Sergeant Keller and spent 20 minutes with him, reviewing procedure, what the formal notification to Harrington's immediate command would look like, what timeline the JAG review would follow, what steps needed to happen before any formal action could be initiated. Keller was a careful man, someone who had spent a career understanding that institutions move slowly and that patience was not passivity. He had reviewed her preliminary file the previous week and had called her afterward and said without preamble, "This is solid work." Coming from Keller, who was not a man who handed out assessments lightly, it had meant something. "He's going to make calls," Keller said. "Right now, wherever he is, he's on the phone." "I know. He has contacts at the command level, real ones, not just connections, people who have protected him before." "I know that too." And Keller looked at her with a direct patience she recognized as professional respect. "And I filed a formal notification with the Inspector General's office 2 days ago," she said. "I arrived on base, which means any attempt to interfere with this investigation from the command level is itself a documentable event. Anyone who makes a call on his behalf right now is creating a record they don't know they're creating." Keller was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You've done this before." "More times than I'd like," she said. She left Keller near the administrative annex and went looking for Emily Carter. She had not told Carter she was coming to Fort Carver today. She hadn't wanted to create anxiety or expectation, but Carter worked in the intelligence section 3 buildings east. And Madison had a question that had been sitting at the edge of her thinking since the morning interview, something Harrington had said or almost said about the timeline of Carter's complaint that didn't quite line up. She found Carter in the hallway outside the intelligence section, walking toward the water fountain, and she said the young woman's name and watched Carter stop and turn and go very still, in the way she had gone still during their original interview, that particular stillness of someone who has learned to wait for whatever bad news is coming. "Nothing is wrong," Madison said immediately. "I just have one question." Carter exhaled, small, controlled. "Okay. When you filed your complaint the first time, in September, before the official record picks it up, who did you give it to?" Carter blinked. "I gave it to my immediate superior, Lieutenant Barnes." "Barnes, not directly to the JAG office?" "No, I was told someone told me to go through the chain of command first. That going directly to the JAG without trying the chain first would look like I was being difficult." "Who told you that?" Something crossed Carter's face, a recognition that the question was more significant than it appeared. "Sergeant Aldrin. He's in unit administration. He's been here for about 7 years." Madison wrote the name. "And Barnes, what did Barnes tell you after you filed with him?" "He said he'd forward it. He said it would take some time. He seemed, I don't know. He seemed sorry about it. Genuinely, but he didn't look at me when he said it." "He didn't look at you?" "No." Carter paused. "I remember thinking it was strange. He always looks at people when he talks to them. He's one of those people. But that day he looked at his desk." Madison looked at her for a moment. "Thank you, Emily." Carter, then she said quietly, "Is it going to stay this time, the investigation, I mean? Is it actually going to stay, or is it going to disappear again, like the last one?" Madison had promised herself years ago, after an investigation that had not stayed, after a case she had built carefully and watched be administratively buried by people with more institutional weight than she had at the time, that she would never make a promise she couldn't keep. She had seen what false reassurance did to people who had already been told in various ways that the system was looking out for them. So she told Carter the truth. "I don't know," she said. "I know the file is solid. I know it's in the right hands. I know that more people have seen it than can unsee it, but I can't promise you what happens at the end. What I can promise you is that I'm not going to let it be quiet." Carter looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "That's more than anyone else has ever said." It wasn't gratitude exactly. It was something more complicated than that, the particular response of someone who has adjusted their expectations so far downward that honesty, even without a guarantee attached to it, feels like something rare. Madison walked back across the base in the early afternoon, and the fog was a distant memory, and the sun was doing what California sun does in the afternoon, pressing hard against everything, and she was replaying the morning, the assembly hall, the specific 3 seconds when Harrington's face had moved at the name Andrea Simmons. She had interviewed 8 of the 9 people who had filed complaints. She had not yet spoken to Simmons, and she had spent 4 months telling herself that was acceptable, that she had enough to build the case without the 9th interview, that she didn't want to push someone who was clearly not ready to speak. But something Harrington had shown her today. Something in the fear behind the cold smile told her she had been wrong about that. Told her that whatever happened with Simmons was not peripheral to this case. It was the center of it. Everything else was real and documentable and mattered enormously. But Simmons was the piece that Harrington was most afraid of, which meant Madison needed to find out why. She sat in her vehicle in the parking lot near the administrative annex and pulled out her phone and found the contact entry for First Lieutenant Andrea Simmons and pressed call and listened to it ring 3 times and was already composing the voicemail in her head when the line picked up. Silence on the other end, then a breath. "Ms. Rourke," said a woman's voice, steady and quiet with the particular steadiness of something that has cost a great deal to maintain. "I figured you'd call eventually." Madison said, "Are you ready to talk?" A pause, long enough that Madison didn't fill it. Then Andrea Simmons said, "I've been ready for 14 months. I just needed to know someone else was already in the room." Madison leaned back in her seat. Outside, the base moved around her, trucks and voices and the ordinary sounds of an institution in motion, not knowing yet that something underneath it was about to shift. "I'm in the room," Madison said. "Tell me everything." Andrea Simmons talked for 2 hours and 14 minutes. Madison did not interrupt. She held the phone against her ear with one hand and wrote with the other, filling pages in her legal pad with the kind of notes that were not summaries but anchors, specific words, specific dates, specific phrases that she would need to find again in the recording later. Because she was recording this call, she had told Simmons so at the start, and Simmons had said, "Good, I want it recorded. I want there to be no version of this conversation that only exists in someone's memory." She had started with the beginning, not with the complaint, not with the incident that had triggered the complaint, but further back. 14 months before the complaint, when she had first arrived at Fort Carver as a newly promoted first lieutenant with an intelligence specialty and a performance record that her previous commanding officer had described in writing as among the strongest he had seen in a decade. She had arrived with ambition and the particular kind of confidence that comes not from arrogance, but from having earned everything you have through consistent, documented, verifiable work. She had arrived believing that this was how the military functioned, that it rewarded the people who performed. Cole Harrington had noticed her within the first week. At first, Simmons said it had seemed like professional interest. He had included her in briefings where her rank did not strictly require her presence. He had made comments in front of others always which had felt important at the time and felt sinister only in retrospect about her analytical capability, about her instincts, about the particular quality of her thinking. She had been pleased in the way any person is pleased when someone experienced and accomplished takes notice of their work. Then gradually, incrementally across a period of 4 months, the nature of the attention had shifted. Simmons described it the way many people describe this specific experience, not as a series of clear incidents, but as a slow change in atmospheric pressure. The comments became slightly more personal. The professional interactions began to include moments that pushed just past the border of professional without crossing it cleanly enough to name. He began to find reasons for them to be in the same space alone, always with a plausible operational justification, always brief, always structured, so that anyone reviewing it afterward would see nothing irregular. "I kept telling myself I was imagining it," Simmons said, and her voice on the phone was entirely steady, the steadiness of someone who has said these things enough times in their own head that saying them aloud has become manageable. "I kept thinking this man is a master sergeant with 22 years of service, a decorated SEAL. Every person on this base either respects him or is afraid of him. If there was something wrong here, someone would have said something. Someone would have done something. The fact that nobody had, I took that as evidence that I was misreading the situation." "When did you know you weren't misreading it?" Madison asked. A pause. "March 17th, 14 months ago." She gave the date with the precision of someone for whom it had become a fixed coordinate. "I was working late in the intelligence section, around 2200 hours. He came in, I was alone, and he..." Another pause, but this one was different in texture. "He made it very clear what he expected, what he believed our relationship was going to involve going forward. And when I said no clearly, directly, without any ambiguity, he said something I have thought about every single day since. Madison waited. He said, "You need to think very carefully about what refusing me is going to cost you. Because I have been in this institution for 22 years, and you have been here for 8 months. And this institution remembers who it owes." The sentence sat on the line between them like something with weight. "He said those exact words," Madison said. "Those exact words. I wrote them down that night. In a notebook I kept at my apartment off base. I wrote them down, and I wrote down the date and the time. And I thought about what to do for 3 days, and then I filed a complaint." "Through the chain of command," Madison said. "Yes, because that's what I was told to do. That's what I had always been told. Go through the proper channels. Respect the process. Trust the institution." A breath. Something close to a hollow laugh, but not quite. "I filed it with my immediate superior, Captain Reeves. Reeves told me he'd handle it. He looked exactly like Lieutenant Barnes looked when Emily Carter described him, like someone who was sorry about what was happening, but not sorry enough to actually do anything about it. 3 weeks later, I found out my quarterly performance evaluation had been revised downward. Not dramatically, just enough that if anyone looked at my record at a certain point in the future, they would see a dip, a reason to question. Did Reeves revise it? Reeves signed it, but the notes, the specific language in the notes, matched Harrington's writing style. I know his writing style because I had read 12 of his operational reports as part of my intelligence work. I recognized it, but I had no way to prove it, no way that would have held up against his word. Madison had stopped writing and was staring at the windshield of her car thinking. "You said you've been ready for 14 months, Madison said. "What stopped you from calling me sooner? I sent 2 interview requests." "I know." Simmons' voice shifted slightly, became something more careful. "I needed to know you were real. I needed to know this wasn't going to be another version of the same thing. Someone coming in collecting testimony, and then the whole thing getting quietly redirected by someone with more institutional pull than the investigator. I've watched it happen to other complaints on this base. I knew Emily's complaint disappeared. I knew about Brooks. I wasn't going to be the 9th person who told their story to someone who didn't have the weight to do anything with it." "And now?" Madison asked. "Now I heard what happened in that assembly hall today. 1,100 people." A pause. "Someone texted me within 5 minutes of it happening, and I thought, okay, this woman is actually in the room." Madison was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Andrea, the notebook, the one you wrote in the night it happened. I still have it. I need it. I know, I've been waiting for someone to ask." By the time the call ended, the sun had moved significantly, and the parking lot was emptying of the last of the day's administrative traffic. Madison sat in the quiet and looked at her legal pad and thought about what she now had, and then she thought about what Harrington was doing right now wherever he was on this base, and she thought about what Keller had said, that he was on the phone making calls, moving his pieces around a board he believed he still controlled. She thought about what she had that he didn't know she had yet. She drove to the guest Alvarez had arranged for her, dropped her bag, splashed water on her face, drank 2 cups of institutional coffee that tasted like a decision made by someone who had given up, and then opened her laptop and began to write. She wrote for 3 hours, not notes, the formal preliminary finding. The document that would go to the Inspector General's office in the morning as the first official time-stamped record of the full scope of what she had found. She wrote it methodically, the way she had been trained, building each claim on documented evidence, citing each testimony with its corroborating data point, constructing the timeline from the 9 complaints backward to the earliest documented incident that matched the pattern, which was 5 years ago, before Emily Carter, before Daniel Brooks, before Andrea Simmons. A complaint from a corporal who had since left the military and who had told Madison during a phone interview in a rain-soaked parking lot in Portland, Oregon. "I left because I couldn't afford to stay. Not financially, I mean I couldn't afford it in here." And he had put a hand against his chest when he said it, even though she could only hear him and not see him. She had known exactly what he meant. At 11:27 that night, she pressed send on the preliminary finding and then sat back in her chair and felt the particular exhaustion of a day that had started at 6:47 in a dining hall and was ending in a guest room with coffee that tasted like institutional resignation. Her phone buzzed, a text from Keller. He's been in meetings with his JAG representative since 1800, 3 hours. Whatever they're building it fast. She texted back, good. Fast means worried. She slept 4 hours. The next morning, she arrived at Major Lawson's office at 7:15 and found Lawson already there with 2 cups of actual coffee from somewhere off base and the expression of someone who had also not slept especially well. He filed a counter complaint, Lawson said before Madison was fully through the door. Madison sat down. Against me. Against the investigation, alleging procedural misconduct. Specifically, he's claiming that your conduct in the assembly hall constituted harassment and that the interview this morning was conducted without proper notification of rights. He was informed of his right to a representative at the start of the interview and declined on the record. I know, I've already pulled the recording notation, but the counter-complaint creates a parallel process. While it's being reviewed, certain investigative actions get complicated. Madison wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. Whose signature is on the counter-complaint? Lawson said a name. Madison recognized it, a brigadier general at the regional command level. Someone Harrington had served with in a previous assignment. Someone who had written one of the commendations in Harrington's file. He moved fast, Madison said. He was ready, Lawson said. He had this prepared, not this specifically, but the framework of it. He knew that if someone ever pushed past a certain point, he was going to respond this way. Which means he's done it before, somewhere else, in a previous assignment. Lawson looked at her carefully. You think this isn't the first base? I think that a man who responds to a one-day investigation with a counter-complaint that has a general signature on it has practiced this. Has a system. You don't build that system for the first crisis. Madison's down the coffee. I need access to his full assignment history. Every base, every unit, every commanding officer for the past 15 years. That's going to take time. How much? A week, maybe, if I go through the right channels. Wrong channels. Lawson was quiet for a moment, then, I know someone at Personnel Records. We were at the same posting 8 years ago. If I ask informally, Madison said, and ask now. Lawson picked up her phone. While Lawson made the call, Madison pulled up the counter-complaint on her own screen and read it carefully. It was well written, better than she had expected, which confirmed that it had not been composed in one evening of panic. The language was precise and the procedural objections were real. Even if they were wrong, they cited actual regulations, interpreted them in ways that stretched the text but not implausibly. Someone with significant legal experience had help with this. Not Harrington's base JAG representative, someone else, someone he had a relationship with, who had been consulted before Madison ever arrived at Fort Carver. This was what she had been afraid of. Not Harrington himself. She had handled Harrington before in different faces, different uniforms, different installations. She had handled men who believed their records made them permanent. What she had been afraid of was the ecosystem around him, the specific network of relationships and obligations and mutual protections that powerful people inside large institutions build over decades, quietly, unremarkably, until the day someone needs to call in the structure all at once. She was seeing the structure now. I've got something, Lawson said, lowering the phone. How fast? End of day. Maybe sooner. But Lawson paused, and the use of the first name, which Lawson had not done before, made Madison look up. My contact mentioned something, without my asking, said there was a flag on Harrington's file from a previous posting. 3 years ago, Fort Baxter in Virginia, a complaint that was reviewed and closed. Reviewed and closed, Madison repeated, very quickly, inside a week, which is unusual. What was the complaint? My contact doesn't know. The specific content is sealed, but the flag exists, which means someone at the time thought it was significant enough to mark even after closing it. Madison was already reaching for her phone to call the Inspector General's liaison in D.C., the one person she knew who had access to sealed flags on personnel records, who could pull that file, who could tell her what was underneath a closed complaint at Fort Baxter 3 years ago. The liaison picked up on the second ring. I need a favor, Madison said. Those words, said the liaison, a man named Gerald Park, whom she had worked with 4 times in the past decade and who had never once been anything other than completely straightforward, always mean I'm going to be here until 9 tonight. Probably, she said. Fort Baxter, Virginia, 3 years ago, a sealed complaint against a Master Sergeant Cole Harrington. I need to know what's in it. A pause. She could hear him typing. That's a sealed record, Madison. I know. I have a live active investigation with 9 documented complainants, a pattern spanning at least 5 years, and a counter-complaint from a regional general that someone had prepared before my investigation reached critical mass. I need to know if Baxter is part of the pattern or a separate incident. More typing, a longer pause. I can get you the flag summary, Park said finally. Not the full file that requires a separate authorization, but the summary. Give me 2 hours. 1.5. 2. I'm not a magician. She closed her eyes briefly. 2. Thank you. She spent the next 2 hours doing what she had done all of the previous day working. She called Sergeant Aldrin, the unit administrator Carter had identified as the person who had told her to go through the chain of command instead of directly to the JAG office. He answered, and when she identified herself, the quality of his silence told her everything she needed to know about whether he understood why she was calling. I'd like to meet with you today, she said. In person, an informal conversation. A pause. I'm not sure I have anything to add to. I'm not asking what you have to add, she said. I'm letting you know that I'll be reviewing your role in the administrative processing of at least 3 complaints in this unit, and I'd like you to have the opportunity to give me your account before the formal record solidifies. That's an opportunity I'm extending to you, Sergeant. You can decline it, but I'd think carefully about whether declining is in your best interest. A longer pause. She could hear him breathing. What time, he said. Noon, Major Lawson's office. He was there at 11:53. I was a compact man in his early 40s, with the cautious, slightly forward posture of someone who has spent a career in administration, someone who understood paperwork the way a surgeon understands anatomy, who knew exactly which documents existed where and how long they were retained, and what happened when they weren't. He sat across from Madison and Major Lawson in a room that felt too warm, and he held his hands flat on the table the same way Harrington had that morning in the conference room. And Madison recognized it as the same gesture performing the same thing, the appearance of openness from someone who was not feeling open. Tell me about the September complaint, she said. Emily Carter. He looked at his hands. I told Specialist Carter to go through her chain of command. That's standard procedure. Is it? In this unit, yes, there's a unit policy. Show me the written policy? A pause. I'd have to find the specific document. I've reviewed the unit's administrative policy documents. There's no written policy requiring complaints to go through the chain of command before JAG. The Army's own regulation specifies that complainants have the right to go directly to the JAG office, and that directing them away from that option can itself constitute a regulatory violation. She held his gaze. So tell me again about the policy. Aldrin's hands moved slightly on the table. Not much, just a readjustment of fingers. I was following guidance, he said, informal guidance. Whose guidance? Silence. Sergeant Aldrin, Lawson said from the other side of the table in the particular tone of a senior officer who has decided to stop being patient. This is the point in the conversation where your options narrow. You can tell us where that guidance came from, or you can leave this room without having told us, and the formal record will reflect that you had the opportunity to provide an account and declined. Which version of that do you want? He looked at Lawson, then at Madison, then at his hands. He said a name. It was not Harrington's name. It was Captain Reeves, the same officer Simmons had reported to, the same one who had looked at his desk when Carter had come to him 14 months ago. The man who had told Aldrin informally over a period of several years that complaints in this unit were to be filtered before they reached the formal process. Who had told him this as a matter of unit culture, not written policy, as one of those unspoken operating instructions that large institutions develop like scar tissue that nobody writes down because the writing would make visible what is meant to stay invisible. Did Reeves tell you directly that complaints should be suppressed? Madison asked. He never used that word, Aldrin said quietly. He made it clear that the unit ran better when things were handled internally. That going outside the unit created problems for everyone. That the people who kept things internal were they were taken care of. Taken care of how? Another pause. Good assignments, favorable transfer requests, the kinds of things that are hard to trace but easy to feel. Madison wrote this down. Is there anything else? She said. I was quiet for a moment. Then he said with the exhausted relief of someone setting down something very heavy. Carter wasn't the first one I redirected. There were 2 before her. In the previous 2 years, I didn't tell them not to file, I just made it inconvenient, made it seem like it would be better if they handled it another way. He looked up at her. His face had the particular expression of a man who has just heard himself say something he cannot unsay. I have kids, he said, not as an excuse, as a fact that now existed alongside the other facts. I understand, Madison said. And she did understand. That was the worst part of these investigations, not the people at the center, not the Harringtons, who were in some ways simple to understand, because their self-interest was primary and visible. The hardest part was the radius. All the people in the orbit of a powerful man who had done small, individually manageable things that added up over time to a structure that protected his ability to harm. Park called at 1:48. Madison stepped out of Lawson's office into the hallway and pressed the phone to her ear. The flag at Baxter, Park said without preamble. The sealed complaint. I can't give you the full content. That authorization is going to take another 48 hours minimum. But I can tell you what the flag summary says. Tell me. The complaint was filed by a lieutenant, female, in Harrington's unit at the time. The complaint alleged, and I'm reading the summary language, conduct unbecoming an officer, specific use of rank and authority to coerce, and retaliation following rejection of an improper request. The complaint was reviewed and closed in 6 days. He paused. 6 days, Madison. A complaint of that nature involving a senior NCO with a decorated record reviewed and closed in 6 days. The summary notes that the reviewing officer found insufficient evidence to sustain the allegation. It doesn't say the allegation was false, it says insufficient evidence. Who was the reviewing officer? Park said the name. Madison stopped walking. The reviewing officer at Fort Baxter 3 years ago, who had found insufficient evidence and closed a complaint against Cole Harrington in 6 days, was currently serving as a colonel at the regional command level. And he was the direct superior of the brigadier general whose signature was on the counter-complaint filed against her investigation this morning. She stood in the hallway with the phone at her ear and felt the architecture of it arranging itself in her mind, not like a discovery, but like a recognition. The way you sometimes recognize a face before you can remember the name. She had known on some level that the counter-complaint with the general's signature was too fast and too organized to be organic. She had known that someone had activated a network. She had not known until 30 seconds ago that the network went this specific direction or that it had this specific history. Gerald, she said very calmly, I need you to flag this call, timestamp it, and I need you to pull the full file from Baxter on emergency authorization. I have active evidence of a pattern connecting that sealed complaint to my current investigation, which makes it directly relevant and gives me the statutory basis for emergency access. A silence on Park's end, a professional silence, the kind of pause that comes from someone calculating the weight of what they're hearing. That's a significant request, he said. I know. If the pattern holds, it holds. I have 9 complaints here that correlate directly to the language in the Baxter summary. Same MO, same retaliation structure, same administrative suppression mechanism. It's not a coincidence, it's a method. And the method has been protected at least once by someone who is now in a position to interfere with my current investigation. Another pause. Give me 3 hours, Park said. And Madison, yes. Be careful about who you talk to between now and when I call back. If this connects where I think it connects, the radius on this is bigger than your base. She looked at the closed door of Lawson's office. Through it, she could hear the muffled sound of Aldrin's voice, still talking to Lawson, still adding detail to the account he had decided to give. I know, she said. She pressed end on the call and stood in the hallway for a moment alone with the sound of the installation moving around her through the walls, the ordinary continuous noise of a large institution that did not yet fully know what was happening inside it. She thought about Andrea Simmons's notebook. She thought about the 6-day review at Fort Baxter. She thought about a colonel who had closed a complaint in 6 days and was now 3 years later. 2 degrees of separation from a counter-complaint designed to slow her down. She thought about what Daniel Brooks had said, that the room had gotten bigger. She thought not yet, but it's about to. She walked back into Lawson's office, sat down across from Aldrin, looked at him steadily and said, "Tell me every complaint you redirected. Every single one. From the beginning, I want every name, every date, and exactly what you were told to do with it." Aldrin looked at her for a moment, then he nodded, and he started talking. Aldrin talked for an hour and 40 minutes. By the time he finished, Lawson had filled 6 pages of her own notepad, and Madison had stopped writing entirely because the account had passed the point where notes were the most important thing. What mattered now was the shape of what she was hearing, the particular architecture of a suppression system that had not been built in a day or designed by one person, but had accumulated layer by layer over years, the way sediment accumulates at the bottom of something that appears still on the surface. Aldrin had redirected 5 complaints before Emily Carter. 5. 2 of them were from soldiers who had since transferred out of Fort Carver. 1 was from a civilian contractor who had left the base in Crowley and whom Madison had not yet identified as part of the pattern because the contractor's name had never appeared in any of the formal complaint records because the complaint had never become formal. It had been redirected so early, so smoothly, that it had left no administrative trace. Aldrin knew about it only because he had been the one who redirected it, and the memory of it had apparently sat in him for 2 years, like a splinter too deep to reach. "Did you tell anyone?" Madison asked. "Anyone outside the unit, at any point?" He shook his head, then stopped. Then said quietly, "I almost called the IG hotline once. About 18 months ago. I picked up the phone and dialed the number, and then I hung up before it connected." "What stopped you?" He looked at the table. "I have a daughter starting college next year. I was thinking about my pension." He looked up. "That sounds like a coward's answer." "It sounds like a human answer," Madison said. "But I need you to understand that those 5 people you redirected, each one of them went through something after that. Their complaints went nowhere. Some of them left the military. Some of them stayed and adjusted their entire understanding of what this institution was willing to do for them. That's not abstract. That's real damage with real weight." She paused. "The fact that you're talking now matters, but it doesn't erase the 5 years before it." He nodded. He didn't defend himself. She respected that. She walked out of Lawson's office at 2:17 in the afternoon and called Keller from the hallway. "I need you to do something," she said without preamble. "I need Harrington's movements today, where he's been, who he's met with, whether he's left the base." "He met with his JAG rep again this morning," Keller said. He had clearly been tracking this without being asked, which was why Madison had given him her number. "And he had a 30-minute phone call with someone at Regional Command. I don't know who. The call was made from a secure line in the communications center." "A secure line," she repeated, "which means he had authorization to use it, which means someone at a command level gave him that access." Madison said nothing for a moment. She was thinking about the colonel at Regional Command, the one who had reviewed and closed the Baxter complaint in 6 days 3 years ago, who was now 2 degrees of separation from the counter-complaint on her investigation. If Harrington had made a call to Regional Command from a secure line, the most likely recipient was someone in that specific chain. "Is he on base right now?" she asked. "As of 40 minutes ago, yes. He was in the NCO club." "The NCO club," she said. "Performing again?" "Seems like it. Several junior NCOs with him, buying drinks, telling stories." Keller's voice was flat. "He's working the room. Let him. I need him on base and I need him visible. Can you make sure he stays that way without tipping him off?" A pause, "And there's a unit equipment inventory scheduled for 1600. I can make sure his attendance is required." "Do that." And Keller, she hesitated. "The counter-complaint, the general's signature. Have you heard anything about how that came together?" The silence on his end lasted just long enough to be informative. "Keller, I heard something," he said carefully, "from someone I trust, that the counter-complaint was drafted before you arrived. Not the specific content, they didn't know exactly what you were going to do or say, but the framework, the procedural objection structure. It was ready. They were waiting for a trigger. They were waiting for me to do anything visible," Madison said, "which means they knew I was coming, which means someone in or near the IG's office told them the investigation had moved to the active phase." Another careful pause. "That's a significant accusation. I know I'm not making it publicly yet, but I need you to know it as a possibility when you're deciding who you talk to about what I'm doing today. Keep the circle tight." "It's been tight," Keller said. There was something in his voice, not quite anger, but something adjacent, a controlled heat. "I've been in this institution for 23 years, Madison. I have watched good people protect bad ones because the alternative was too expensive. I am very tired of watching that happen. Whatever you need from me, you have it. She thanked him and ended the call and stood in the hallway for a moment, feeling the particular combination of gratitude and grief that comes when honest people tell you they've been waiting for someone else to be honest first. Keller had spent 23 years watching. He had made choices in those 23 years. Some of them probably not choices. He was proud of small accommodations, looked away moments, the kind of institutional compromises that accumulate without you noticing until you look back and see the distance between where you started and where you are. And yet here he was, still, willing to stand in the right place when the moment required it. She had seen this before in other investigations. The people who ultimately helped were rarely the ones who had been perfect throughout. They were the ones who had lived inside the institution long enough to understand it completely, and who at a certain point chose differently. She found Emily Carter again at 3:15 in the break room of the intelligence section. Carter was alone drinking coffee, staring at the middle distance, the way people do when they're not looking at anything but are thinking about everything. "I have a question," Madison said, sitting across from her, "and it might be hard to answer." Carter set down her cup. "Okay. When your complaint disappeared, when it became clear that nothing was going to happen, what did you do day to day after that?" Carter looked at her for a moment. "I adjusted," she said. The word was careful and flat. "I learned where the edges were. I learned how close I could get to certain topics before things got uncomfortable. I learned to perform being fine with things I wasn't fine with." She paused. "I got really good at it. I'm still good at it. It's a skill I wish I didn't have." "Did you think about leaving?" "Every day for about 6 months. Then I stopped thinking about it. Not because it got better, because I ran out of energy for wanting something different." Her voice was entirely steady. "You know what the worst part is? I used to be the person who reported things. In every unit I'd ever been in before this one. If something was wrong, I was the one who said something. It was just who I was. After this, I'm not that person anymore. I don't know if I'm ever going to be that person again." Madison looked at her. She wanted to tell her that she would be. She wanted to say something reassuring that was also true. She settled for something smaller and realer. "The fact that you talked to me when I asked," Madison said. "The fact that you answered the phone and told me the truth, that's that person. That's still there." Carter said nothing. She looked at her coffee cup. Something moved in her face that was not quite crying, but was close enough to make the air in the room feel different. "What happens now?" Carter asked. "Now I need you to be available for the formal process. There will be a hearing. It won't be this week, possibly not this month, but it will happen, and when it does, what you've already told me on the record is going to matter more than almost anything else in the file. Because you were first. Because you tried the right way and got redirected and tried again anyway." Carter nodded slowly. "And in the meantime," Madison said, "if anyone on this base, anyone regardless of rank, says anything to you that feels like pressure or suggestion or a very friendly reminder of what's good for your career, I need you to call me immediately, not tomorrow, the moment it happens." Carter looked up. "You think they'll try to get to us?" "I think they already are. I think the calls Harrington has been making today are laying groundwork. I think some of those calls are about building alternative narratives around the people who came forward." She held Carter's gaze. "You are not imagining it if it happens, and you are not alone in it." Carter picked up her coffee again. Her hands were steady. "Okay," she said, "just that. Steady and direct and about 10 times braver than it sounded." Madison drove back to the guest quarters at 4:40, changed her shirt, drank another cup of the institutional coffee she had made peace with, and reviewed her files for 40 minutes. She was building toward tomorrow, toward the formal notification to Harrington's commanding officer, toward the initiation of JAG proceedings, toward the process that would move this from an investigation into an official record that no one could quietly fold up and put in a drawer. But first, she needed Park's call. It came at 5:51. "I have the Baxter file," Park said. He sounded different than he had in the earlier call. Not distressed. Park did not do distressed, but more careful. The careful of someone holding something hot. "Tell me," she said. The complainant at Baxter was a Lieutenant Sarah Ewan, 27 years old at the time, 2 years into her service, intelligence specialty. The complaint alleged, and this is from the full file, not just the summary coercion retaliation, and one specific incident that the original complaint describes as physical. He paused. "Physical contact without consent." during a private meeting in a secured workspace. Madison had gone completely still. The reviewing officer, she said, her voice was very controlled. Colonel Raymond Draper, who as of 8 months ago is the senior oversight officer at the regional command level, responsible for, among other things, reviewing Inspector General investigations that originate from bases within his jurisdiction. He let that sentence sit. Madison said quietly, he's reviewing his own cover-up. He reviewed a complaint. He closed it in 6 days. He may have had completely legitimate reasons for closing it. The file doesn't show clear evidence of bad faith in the review itself. It shows a determination that is, to put it charitably, difficult to reconcile with the specificity and detail of the complainant's account. He paused again. Sarah Ewen left the military 11 months after filing that complaint. She now lives in Austin, Texas. She works in private sector intelligence. She has not spoken publicly about her service at Baxter. She will, Madison said. It wasn't a prediction. It was a decision she was making on behalf of an investigation that had just grown by a very significant magnitude. Gerald, everything you just told me, it's in a secure file, encrypted on IG servers, not accessible to regional command oversight, not accessible to Draper, not through any channel I can see. Good. I need you to flag Draper's involvement for formal conflict of interest review. Today, timestamp it. I need that on record before he has any opportunity to insert himself further into the counter-complaint process. That's going to create a significant... I know what it's going to create, she said. Please do it anyway. A pause. Sending the flag now. She could hear him typing. Madison, this case of Ewen talks and the Baxter file connects cleanly to the Fort Carver pattern. This isn't going to stay at the installation level. No, she said, it isn't. You're going to have a lot of weight pushing back. I know. Are you ready for that? She thought about the question. Not about whether she was ready. In some abstract sense, she had been doing this work for 11 years. She had lost one career to it and built another one from the ruins of that loss. She understood the cost better than almost anyone. She thought about it in the specific sense of right now, this moment, with this case, with these 9 people, with the 10th person. She hadn't yet talked to Sarah Ewen in Austin, who had left the military 11 months after filing a complaint that was reviewed and closed in 6 days by a man who was now in a position to interfere with what Madison was building. Yes, she said. She made the call to Austin at 6:23. Sarah Ewen picked up on the third ring and said carefully, "Who is this?" "My name is Madison Rourke. I'm a federal special investigator working on a case involving Master Sergeant Cole Harrington. I believe you know who he is." A silence that lasted exactly 4 seconds. Madison counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then how did you find me? Personnel records cross-referenced with complaint logs at Fort Baxter 3 years ago. Your name was in a sealed file. I have emergency authorization to access it in connection with an active investigation. Another silence. Different in texture from the first one, less shock, more something being decided. How many others? Ewen asked. 9 documented complainants at Fort Carver. Possibly more from other postings that I haven't fully traced yet. 9. The number seemed to do something to her. Madison heard her exhale. I always thought when I filed, I thought I was probably not the first. I just couldn't prove it. They couldn't prove it either, apparently, since they closed it in 6 days. Her voice was precise and dry, the voice of someone who has processed her anger into something functional over 3 years of distance. I want to know what happened at Baxter, Madison said. Everything, on the record. Are you recording this call? Not yet. Not until you give me your consent. A pause, then start recording. Madison pressed the button on her recorder. Sarah Ewen talked for 1 hour and 37 minutes. What she described was not identical to Simmons's account, but it ran along the same lines, the same initial attention, the same gradual shift in its nature, the same private moment when the mask came off and the request was made explicitly, the same refusal, and this was the piece that was different from Simmons, the piece that pushed it further. The same night, not 3 weeks later, but the same night Harrington had returned to the secured workspace where Ewen was still working and done something that the complaint file had described as physical contact without consent, and that Ewen described now in her own words into Madison's recorder in precise and unflinching detail as an assault. He had grabbed her arm. He had told her with his hand on her arm and his full height above her that she would regret the choice she was making. He had not hit her. He had not, by the narrowest possible technical definition, crossed the line of what could be prosecuted without corroborating evidence. He had put his hand on her and his body in her space and his threat in the air, and then he had left. And she had stood in the secured workspace for 7 minutes before she could move. I filed the next day, she said. The moment I got to the administrative office, I knew what I had seen happen to other people who didn't file, and I told myself, you file. You file the moment you can. You don't wait. And you filed with your commanding officer. I filed directly with the JAG office. I knew about the chain of command route, and I wasn't willing to risk it. I went directly to JAG. She paused. It didn't matter. The JAG assigned to review it was new, 26 years old, first posting. He reviewed it and forwarded it to Colonel Draper because Draper was the senior oversight officer and the complaint involved a senior NCO. And Draper reviewed it and closed it in 6 days. Another pause. The JAG officer, the young one, he found me 2 weeks after the closure. He caught me alone in the hallway and he said very quietly, very fast, I'm sorry, I disagree with the determination. I want you to know that. And then he walked away and I never heard from him again. Madison said, what was his name? Ewan said a name. Madison wrote it down. Then she looked at what she had written. Then she said slowly, what rank is he now? Do you know? Last I heard he made captain. I don't know where he's posted. I'm going to find him, Madison said. Would you be willing to speak to him if I make that connection? A pause. Yes. And you'll come forward formally if this reaches a hearing? Yes. No hesitation, not even the shadow of one. I've been waiting for 3 years for someone to build enough of the structure that my piece of it doesn't get dismissed in 6 days. Her voice was steady and definite. I'm not waiting anymore. Madison ended the call at 7:58 and sat in the guest quarters with the recorder in her hand and thought about the young JAG officer who had told Sarah Ewan in a hallway that he disagreed with the determination and then walked away. He had been 26 years old and new to his posting and facing a colonel's decision with no support structure and no senior advocate. He had done the smallest possible thing, 2 sentences in a hallway, and then disappeared back into the institution. But he had done those 2 sentences. He had not done nothing. And now, years later, those 2 sentences were part of a record that Madison was building, and his name was in her notebook, and she was going to find him. This was the part that the people who committed these acts never understood. They believed that time erased things. They believed that 6-day reviews and administrative closures and the simple weight of institutional continuity would eventually make the past into something that stayed past. They never understood that the people they had harmed were keeping records too, in journals and notebooks and memory, and the particular fierce precision of someone who refuses to let an injustice become merely something that happened to them once. They never understood that investigators like Madison existed not because institutions wanted them, but because the people who had been failed by institutions needed them to. At 8:45, her phone buzzed. Keller. He left the base, Keller said. She sat up. When, about 40 minutes ago, we missed it. The equipment inventory, he showed up for 20 minutes and then left through the south gate, his personal vehicle. Where did he go? We don't know yet. His JAG rep is still on base. His personal phone is off. Madison was already standing, her jacket in her hand. Is he required to stay on base? He's not under restriction. Not yet. I don't have the authority to restrict his movement without a formal order, and the formal order requires a hearing that hasn't been scheduled yet. Can you reach the commanding officer? Colonel Bridges is in a dinner meeting with regional command personnel. A pause that carried its own significance. He's been in that meeting since 1800. Regional command. The same people who had signed the counter-complaint. The same chain that ran back to Colonel Draper, who had closed the Baxter complaint in 6 days. Bridges was in a dinner meeting with them right now while Harrington drove off base through the south gate with his phone turned off. Who initiated that dinner meeting, she asked. I don't know, it was scheduled this afternoon after your session in the assembly hall. She thought fast. Keller. Who on this base has the authority to initiate a formal hold on Harrington's movement without going through Bridges? A pause. The provost marshal, if there's documented cause to believe he's a flight risk or an interference risk. Is there? He turned his phone off and left the base without telling anyone where he was going, On the same day, a federal investigator documented that he referenced the specific contents of a confidential investigative file. Keller's voice was careful and precise. "I'd say there's reasonable cause." "Get me the provost marshal," she said, "now." She was on the phone with the base provost marshal, Major Arthur Chen, 9 minutes later. Chen was a methodical man, not excitable, the kind of person who gathered facts before conclusions, and who asked 3 clarifying questions about the regulatory basis for the hold before he was willing to initiate one. Madison answered all 3 questions directly and cited the specific regulatory language, which she knew from memory because she had needed it before. Chen listened, asked one more question, and then said, "Give me 15 minutes. It took 11. At 9:22, the Provost Marshal's office issued a formal notification requiring Cole Harrington to report to base administration within 2 hours or be considered absent without authorization, which would trigger a military police response. At 9:47, Harrington's phone came back on. At 9:51, Keller texted Madison, "He's coming back, Southgate, ETA 20 minutes. She texted back, "I'll be there." She was at the administrative building when Harrington walked through the door at 10:14, and he saw her immediately and stopped. And something crossed his face that was not the cold smile from the assembly hall and was not the controlled intimidation from the conference room. It was something rawer than both of those things, something that might, in a different man, at a different moment, have looked like the beginning of genuine reckoning. But Harrington was not at genuine reckoning yet. He was at cornered, which was different. Cornered was when people were most dangerous. He walked toward her and he said quietly and deliberately, "You need to be very careful about what you think you're doing. You left the base," she said, "tonight, with your phone off, while I was in the process of adding significant new evidence to an active investigation. I want to know where you went." "I went for a drive." "We're nowhere specific." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have." She looked at him. He was tired, not just tonight, tired, but the specific, deep tiredness of a man who has been managing a very large, very complicated fiction for a very long time and has just felt the edges of it start to soften. She could see it in the set of his eyes around the corners, where the muscles that hold an expression in place had started to give a little. "Master Sergeant Harrington," she said quietly, "I spoke tonight with Sarah Ewan." He went completely still. "I know about Fort Baxter," she said. "I know about what happened in the secured workspace. I know about the complaint in the 6-day review, and I know the name of the reviewing officer." She held his gaze. "And I know that the reviewing officer and the general who signed your counter-complaint are in the same chain of command. I have all of that. It's time-stamped and encrypted and logged with the Inspector General's office in Washington. It exists now whether or not this conversation continues." He said nothing. "I'm going to tell you something," and she said, and her voice was not angry, and it was not triumphant. It was the voice she used when she meant exactly what she was saying and needed the other person to understand that. "You have spent 22 years in this institution. You have done things that genuinely mattered. You have served in combat. You have led people under impossible conditions. You have earned some of what your record says. That is true. I am not erasing that. But you have also done things over years in private spaces to people who had less power than you that your record does not say. And those things are true too. Both of those things are true at the same time. And the institution you serve cannot function with integrity if the second set of things is allowed to remain invisible because the first set is impressive." He stared at her. His chest was moving. She could see him breathing controlled, deliberate, the breath of someone working very hard at something. "You have a choice," she said. "You can continue to let the people around you take actions on your behalf that are going to make this significantly worse for everyone involved. Or you can decide that the version of this, where you cooperate fully with the formal process, where you stop the calls, stop the counter complaints, stop the network, is the version that leaves some part of your legacy intact." "And if I don't," he said, not a question, just the shape of one, "then I follow every thread until there's nothing left to follow," she said. "And everyone who touched this, everyone who made a call, signed a document, redirected a complaint, had a dinner meeting at exactly the wrong time, they're all part of the record, every single one." The hallway was very quiet. The administration building was mostly empty at this hour, and the silence felt enormous. The way silence feels in large institutional spaces when the institution has stopped moving for the night. Harrington looked at her for a long time. She could see things moving behind his face, not simple things, not clean calculations, but the complicated interior motion of a man, confronting, maybe for the first time in 22 years, a situation he could not command his way out of. He said finally, "I want to speak to a different JAG representative." "That's your right," she said. "The formal process starts in the morning. I'd suggest having someone present who has reviewed the full scope of the documentation." He nodded, one small tight motion. He turned and walked down the hallway, and she watched him go. The full bearing, the controlled walk, the precise posture of 22 years of institutional identity, and she thought about what Simmons had said, that she had been ready for 14 months, waiting for someone else to be in the room first. She thought about the room, about how many people were in it now, about how many more were coming. She pulled out her phone and called Park. "He's back on base," she said, "and he asked for a new JAG representative tonight." Park was quiet for a moment. "That's a tell." "Yes," she said, "it is." "How are you holding up?" She thought about the question. She thought about 6 years ago when an investigation had collapsed around her, and she had spent 4 months in a rental apartment in Phoenix trying to understand how the institution she had served for 8 years had decided that protecting one person's image was worth more than everything she had built. She thought about how she had come back from that, not easily, not quickly, but completely, because the thing that had broken her was also the thing that had clarified what she was for. "I'm fine," she said, and it was entirely true. "Get some sleep," Park said. "Tomorrow is going to be long." She put her phone in her pocket and walked out of the administration building into the night air of Fort Carver, and the base was quiet around her, and the stars were out, and she stood still for a moment, just letting herself exist in the space between what had already happened and what was coming next. She thought about Emily Carter saying the room got bigger. She thought not yet Emily, but we're getting there. She slept 4 hours and woke before the alarm. It was 5:43 in the morning, and the base was in that specific pre-dawn state between silence and motion, and Madison lay still for 60 seconds doing what she always did on the mornings of significant days, running the structure of everything she had in her mind, feeling for the weak points, the places where something could shift or be challenged or fail. She had done this before every major proceeding in 11 years of this work, and it had never made her feel fully certain, but it had always made her feel prepared, which was the only version of certainty that was real. She had 10 complainants now, 10. Sarah Yuen had sent her formal written consent at midnight, a 2-paragraph email from Austin that was precise and thorough, and had clearly been composed by someone who had been rehearsing it in her head for 3 years. The young JAG officer who had told Yuen in a hallway that he disagreed with Draper's determination was a captain named Marcus Webb, currently stationed at Fort Lewis in Washington, and Gerald Park had located him at 11:30 the previous night and sent Madison his contact information with a one-line note. He's been expecting someone to call. Madison had set her alarm to reach Webb by phone at 6:15, which gave her 30 minutes to get dressed and get her notes in order. She was on the phone with Webb at 6:12. He picked up immediately. He had the voice of someone who had not been asleep. "Ms. Rourke," he said, "I heard you were working this case. How did you hear? Sarah Yuen texted me last night after she spoke with you." A pause. "I've thought about Baxter almost every week for 3 years. About those 2 sentences I said in the hallway. About whether they were enough. About whether I should have done more. Why didn't you?" I was quiet for a moment. Not defensive, the question was honest, and he answered it honestly. "I was 26 years old and it was my first posting, and the man who had made the determination was a colonel with 30 years of service and more institutional weight than I could have moved if I'd tried." He paused. "That's the honest answer. I knew it was wrong. I told her it was wrong. And then I made a calculation that I am not proud of. I calculated that my word alone against Draper's determination would accomplish nothing except to end my career before it started." Another pause. "I've become a better officer since then. Whether that makes up for it or not, I genuinely don't know." "It doesn't erase it," Madison said, "but what you do from here can matter." She paused. "Will you come forward formally on the record? A sworn statement about your assessment of the Baxter Review and the specific reasons you believed Draper's determination was inconsistent with the evidence in the complaint." A silence, 6 seconds. She let it breathe. "Yes," he said. "I'll fly there today if you need me to." "Tomorrow," she said. The formal process begins this morning, and I need you there for the second day of proceedings. She was in Lawson's office at 7:30 with a coffee that was better than anything the guest quarters had offered. Lawson had brought a small French press from somewhere, and it was the single greatest act of institutional hospitality Madison had experienced in 4 days on this base. Keller was already there, sitting straight in the chair by the window with his hands on his knees and the controlled alertness of someone who had also risen before his alarm. Bridges wants a pre-meeting, Lawson said before Madison could sit down. Before the formal proceedings, in his office, 800 hours. About what? He didn't say, but his adjutant called at 0630 to set it up, which means he was awake at 0630 thinking about it. He came out of that dinner meeting last night and went straight to thinking about this, Keller said. What do you know about him? Madison asked. Bridges, specifically. Lawson and Keller looked at each other for a fraction of a second, the compressed communication of two people who have worked in the same institution long enough to have an entire conversation in a glance. He's not Harrington's friend, Keller said carefully. He's not his protector, not the way Draper apparently was. But he's been the commanding officer here for 2 years, and Harrington's record is spotless on paper, and Bridges approved 3 of his commendations. He's invested in the narrative. He's going to want a way out that doesn't make him complicit, Lawson said. Then I'll give him one, Madison said, if he's willing to cooperate with the formal process and not interfere. She finished her coffee and walked to Bridges' office at 7:58. Colonel David Bridges was in his early 50s, silver-haired, the build of someone who had been athletic 20 years ago and had maintained enough of it to still carry himself like it. He was standing when she came in, which she noted he had chosen not to sit behind his desk and use the physical authority of the desk, which told her something about the kind of conversation he wanted to have. Ms. Roark, he said, thank you for coming. Thank you for the meeting, Colonel. He gestured to the chairs. They sat. His adjutant closed the door behind them and was gone. I've read your preliminary finding, he said, the one you filed with the IG's office 2 days ago. She kept her face entirely neutral. That document is part of a confidential investigative process. I'm aware of that. I also have a command responsibility for the installation and the personnel under my command, and certain information came to my attention through... He stopped himself, recalibrated. I'm going to be direct with you. I understand that information reached me through channels it probably shouldn't have. I'm prepared to account for that in the formal process. She looked at him steadily. What are you asking me, Colonel? He pressed his hands flat on his thighs. The same gesture, the same positioning. She was beginning to think it was military academy training, some fundamental instruction about appearing open. I'm asking you how this goes from here. I'm asking what the path is that does the most right by the people involved. The people who filed the complaints. Yes, he held her gaze. I'm not asking you to protect me. I'm not asking you to minimize anything. I made decisions as the commanding officer of this installation that I need to account for. I approved reviews that I should have scrutinized more carefully. I allowed unit culture to substitute for institutional process in ways that... He stopped. His jaw worked slightly. I allowed things to continue that I should have examined. I don't know yet how much I knew and chose not to examine versus how much I was genuinely shielded from. That's a distinction I'm still working out. That distinction will matter in the formal proceeding, she said. I know. He looked at her. I want you to know that I will not take any action to interfere with this investigation. I will not make calls to regional command. I will not, whatever was set in motion before this morning, I'm stopping it. She absorbed this. She thought about what it meant and what it didn't mean. The counter-complaint, she said, the one with the general's signature. I had no part in drafting it. His voice was flat with something that might have been genuine. I found out it had been filed this morning. I did not know it was coming. But you know where it came from? A pause. I have a strong suspicion, which I will share with the formal process. She studied him for a moment. She had interviewed a great many people in 11 years, people who were guilty in performing innocence, people who were innocent in performing composure, people who were somewhere in the complicated middle where most human behavior actually lived. Bridges was in the middle, not the clean middle, not a man who had been entirely ignorant of everything around him, but not the dark end either. He was a commanding officer who had let a comfortable narrative substitute for rigorous scrutiny, who had signed things he should have questioned, who had attended one dinner meeting too many without asking who had called it and why. A was the weight of the institution itself, not the corruption at its center, but the comfortable compliance that allowed corruption to survive. I appreciate your candor, she said. The formal process begins at 1400 today. I'd ask that you be present and prepared to make a statement about your role in the administrative handling of complaints in this unit over the past 2 years. He nodded once, tight. Like Harrington had nodded the night before, but different in what it carried, this was not a man who had been cornered. This was a man who had looked at a corner and walked toward it himself. She was back in Lawson's office at 8:22. He's cooperating, she told them. Keller raised an eyebrow. Fully enough to matter. He's stopping whatever interference was in motion, and he's prepared to account for his own role. She sat down, which means we proceed this afternoon without the command level actively working against us. That's significant. It changes the landscape, Lawson said, completely. She spent the next 5 hours doing the final preparation. She organized the testimony materials coordinated with the JAG office about the formal structure of the afternoon proceedings, confirmed that Aldrin had submitted his written statement, confirmed that Keller and Lawson would both be present as institutional witnesses, and made one final call to Daniel Brooks. Today at 1400, she told him, the formal proceeding begins. You don't have to say anything today. This first session is about establishing the record. But I want you to be there, you and Emily. Is that possible? Yeah, he said. Yeah, we'll be there. How are you doing? A pause. Somebody on my hall said something to me yesterday. One of the guys who's been here a while. He said he'd heard what happened in the assembly hall, and he said he'd always thought Harrington was off, but he hadn't known what to do with it. He said he was glad someone finally did something. He paused. That felt strange, because I filed 14 months ago. We filed. We did something, and this guy was walking around thinking nobody had, because nothing happened. That's exactly why today matters, Madison said. What you did wasn't nothing. It just needed more structure around it. Yeah, he said quietly. I'm starting to understand that. At 9:50, her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize, area code she didn't immediately place. She answered. Miss Rourke, a man's voice. Older, the controlled cadence of someone who had spent a career in institutional settings. My name is Colonel Raymond Draper. She went very still. I know who you are, Colonel, she said. I imagine you do. A pause. I'm calling to tell you that I have retained private legal counsel and that I will be recusing myself from any oversight role related to your investigation or the counter-complaint effective immediately. She waited. I want to be clear, he said, that my recusal is voluntary and precautionary. I am not acknowledging ocean into home. Colonel Draper, she said carefully, I'm going to stop you there. This call is being recorded. If you'd like to make a statement, I'd recommend doing so through your legal counsel in the formal process. A very brief silence. Understood. And then, Ms. Rourke, whatever you may believe about what happened at Baxter, the determination I made was based on the evidence available to me at the time. I believe you believe that, she said. We'll work out the rest in the proceeding. I hung up. She held the phone for a moment. Draper had called her personally. Not through a lawyer, not through an official channel. He had called her cell phone, which meant he had gotten the number from somewhere he shouldn't have. And he had called specifically to tell her he was stepping back, which meant he was afraid of what was in the Baxter file, which meant he knew what was in it, which meant the determination he had made 3 years ago was not as he had claimed simply based on the evidence available. She called Park. Draper just called me directly, she said. Voluntary recusal. Park said nothing for 3 seconds. Then he's protecting himself. He's trying to. He wants the recusal on record so he can argue later that he stepped back voluntarily the moment he recognized the potential conflict. It won't be enough. No, Park said. It won't. Madison, the full Baxter file. The JAG officer's original assessment notes the ones he submitted before Draper overrode them. They're in the file. Webb's notes. 26-year-old Captain Webb writing a formal assessment that directly contradicts the determination his colonel made 3 days later. She absorbed this. Webb documented his disagreement formally. Apparently, he was more careful than he gave himself credit for in that hallway. He submitted his assessment as part of the formal record before the determination was made. Draper's determination is in the file. Webb's assessment is in the file. They are, to use the technical term, irreconcilable. She thought about Webb, saying, "I've thought about Baxter almost every week for 3 years. About those 2 sentences in the hallway. About whether they were enough." He had done more than 2 sentences. He had documented his assessment formally, and then watched it be overridden, and then done what he could in a hallway, and then he had carried that for 3 years thinking it wasn't enough. "Tell him," she said, "when you talk to Webb today, tell him about the assessment. Tell him what he did 3 years ago mattered. That it's in the file, that it's part of what's going to make this hold." "I'll tell him," Parks said, and then in a tone that was not his usual professional neutral, "You built something solid here, Madison, you really did." The formal proceeding began at 1400 hours in the main JAG conference room at Fort Carver, and it was not the dramatic public event that the Assembly Hall confrontation had been. It was a room with a long table and 9 chairs in the particular institutional fluorescence of military administrative spaces, and it smelled like coffee and paper and the specific tension of official process. Madison sat on one side of the table with Lawson and Keller. The JAG officer running the proceeding, a major named Diane Foster, a trim, careful woman in her 40s who had reviewed Madison's preliminary file the previous evening and whose expression throughout had been the particular controlled neutrality of someone who was genuinely shocked but professionally committed not to show it, sat at the head. Harrington sat on the other side with his new JAG representative, a civilian attorney named Gerald Crane who had arrived from San Diego at noon and who had already spent 2 hours reviewing the full file, and whose face when he had come out of that review had been the particular color of someone who has just understood the exact dimensions of the situation they are now in. Bridges sat to the left of Harrington, which was notable, not adjacent, not in the same section, but present. He had brought his own counsel. The first hour of this proceeding was structural, though: the formal establishment of the investigative record, the entry of Madison's preliminary finding, the acknowledgement of each complainant's testimony, the confirmation of the documentary evidence. Foster read each piece into the record with the methodical precision of someone who understood that this document was going to exist long after everyone in this room was gone. When Foster read Emily Carter's name into the record, Madison glanced at the door. Carter was in the building. Madison had confirmed it 20 minutes ago, but not in the room. She had told both Carter and Brooks that they didn't need to be present for this first session. She had told them the truth. The formal testimony sessions would come later, and those would be the sessions that truly mattered. What she had not told them was that being in this building today, while this record was being established, would mean something. Not legally, humanly. The first twist of the afternoon came at 1547 when Foster read into the record the name of the complainant from Fort Baxter and noted that Sarah Ewan had submitted a formal statement and would be available via video conference for a formal deposition. Harrington's attorney Crane leaned toward his client and said something very quietly. Harrington did not respond. He sat with his hands flat on the table and his eyes on the middle distance and the particular stillness of someone who was managing something enormous inside a very controlled exterior. I had not said a word since the proceeding opened. Not one word. Madison had expected resistance, procedural objections, character defenses, the deployment of the impressive record as a counter-narrative. Instead, there was silence. The silence of a man who had spent 22 years being the loudest authority in every room he entered, and who had, in the past 48 hours, run out of rooms. At 16:20, Foster addressed him directly. "Master Sergeant Harrington, you have the right to make a statement at this time. Do you wish to do so?" Crane leaned in again. Harrington listened. Then he said quietly, "Not at this time." Foster noted it in the record. At 16:35, Bridges made his statement. He was precise and careful and clearly had rehearsed it, and what he said amounted to a formal acknowledgement that complaints within the unit had not received the rigorous administrative attention they required under regulation, and that as commanding officer he accepted institutional responsibility for failures in the oversight process. He did not name Harrington directly in his statement. He did not need to. The record named Harrington plenty. At 17:10, the second major twist of the day arrived, and it came from a direction Madison had not anticipated. The door opened and a soldier stepped in, not someone she had seen before. A young woman, maybe 22 in working uniform, who stopped inside the door and looked at Foster and said quietly, "I'm sorry to interrupt. I was told I should come here if I had something relevant. I have a statement." Foster looked at Madison. Madison looked at the soldier. Your name, Foster said. Specialist Rivera. Gabriela Rivera. I've been stationed here for 8 months. And what is your statement, Specialist? Rivera looked at Harrington. It was a direct look, not defiant, not afraid. The look of someone who has decided. About 6 weeks ago, Master Sergeant Harrington told me informally after a training review that certain female personnel in intelligence specialties had a tendency to overextend their role. That's his exact phrase. He said it to me and to 2 other specialists. And then he looked at me specifically and said, some people need to learn their lane before they start thinking they're qualified to make complaints about things above their pay grade. She paused. I didn't know at the time if that was a direct comment about anything specific. I found out yesterday what was happening with the investigation, and I realized that comment 6 weeks ago was not incidental. The room was very still. He made that comment to you after the investigation had reached the active phase, Madison said. 6 weeks ago, Rivera said. Yes, ma'am. In front of 2 other witnesses. Yes, ma'am. Madison looked at Foster. I'd like to add Specialist Rivera's statement to the formal record as evidence of continued intimidation behavior during the active investigative period. So noted, Foster said. Specialist Rivera, please be seated. We'll take a formal statement from you before the session closes. Crane was leaning toward Harrington again. This time Harrington moved away from him. Slightly, 1 inch maybe, but away. As if the proximity of a lawyer managing a strategy he no longer had control over was more than he could absorb. The session recessed at 17:45. Madison stepped into the hallway and found Emily Carter standing near the water fountain, Brooks beside her. They had been in the building the whole time. They had not come to the door, had not asked to be in the room, but they had been there. Carter looked at her. How is it going? It's going, Madison said. It's in the record now. All of it. That doesn't disappear. What happens to him? That's for the formal hearing to determine. Could be administrative separation, could be formal prosecution depending on what the full investigation of Baxter produces. Could be reduction in rank. I can't tell you the outcome, but I can tell you that the record that exists now, with 10 complainants with documentary evidence, with the Baxter file, with Webb's original assessment, that record is not going to be revised. It's too many people. It's too much paper. It's too well witnessed. Carter nodded slowly. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, that corporal, the one you told me about who left the military, the one who said he left because he couldn't afford to stay here. She touched her own chest. Did you ever tell him that there were 9 others, that there was a pattern? Madison looked at her. No, not yet. Will you? Yes, Madison said. And then because it was true, thank you for asking. Carter looked at her for a moment. Then she said with the particular steadiness that had characterized everything she had said since the beginning. He needs to know he wasn't just unlucky. He needs to know it wasn't random. That matters. Even now, maybe especially now. Madison called him that evening. The corporal James Wyatt, now living in Portland, working in logistics, who had called himself a coward for leaving, and whom Madison had spent 6 months trying to convince otherwise. She called him and told him about the 10 complainants. She told him about the Fort Baxter file. She told him about the pattern, the documented timeline, the administrative suppression structure. She told him that the record now showed clearly that what had happened to him was not a failure of his perception or his endurance or his courage. It was a system, deliberately constructed, consistently operated. And he had run into it at the earliest point before anyone else had built enough of the structure to make the system visible. I was quiet on the phone for a long time. You're telling me, he said slowly, that I wasn't imagining it. You were not imagining it. And that if I had stayed, if I'd been able to stay, you couldn't have known, she said. You did what you had to do to survive it. That is not failure. That is what surviving something looks like. Another silence. She could hear him breathing. I spent 3 years thinking I just wasn't strong enough, he said. 3 years. I know, she said. Is there anything I can do now to be part of this? If you're willing to submit a formal statement, even now, even 3 years later, the additional record from an earlier period helps establish how long the pattern goes. But there's no obligation. What you've already told me is already part of the investigative foundation. You're already part of why this exists. Send me the forms, he said. I'll do it. She sent the forms at 9:15, and received them back completed at 11:40. She sat in the guest quarters and read through them carefully and felt the particular specific weight of 11 years of this work, all of it, the investigations that had held, and the ones that had been buried, the people who had talked and the ones who hadn't been able to, the mornings like this one when the record grew, and the people who had doubted themselves discovered finally that they had always been telling the truth. Captain Marcus Webb arrived on base the following morning at 8:40, and Madison met him in Lawson's office. He was taller than she had expected, with the careful eyes of someone who reads situations quickly, and he shook her hand and said, "I should have called someone sooner. I've said that to myself 100 times. You documented your assessment formally," she said, 3 years ago, before Draper overrode it. He stopped. "You found that? It's in the full Baxter file. Your original JAG assessment is in the record. It directly contradicts Draper's determination and predates it by 3 days. You did not do nothing, Captain. You did what you were trained to do. What was done with it afterward, that's Draper's accounting, not yours." He stood very still for a moment, the particular stillness of someone absorbing something they had needed to hear for a long time. "Thank you," he said, and she could tell from the way he said it that he was not thanking her for a compliment. He was thanking her for a fact. The formal hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later, and Madison flew back to San Diego to prepare the final documentation package. She worked for 12 days straight, and the package, when complete, was 237 pages and contained every piece of evidence she had gathered from the earliest Reed-directed complaint 5 years prior to Specialist Rivera's statement 6 weeks ago, organized chronologically and cross-indexed by complainant, by incident type, by the administrative action that followed each complaint, and by the documented role of each individual who had been part of the suppression structure. She filed it with the Inspector General's office on a Tuesday afternoon and then sat at her desk for a moment with her hands flat on the surface, which she recognized as the same gesture she had seen in that conference room at Fort Carver on the first morning when Harrington had sat across from her performing openness. She took her hands off the desk. The hearing lasted 4 days. On the first day, Emily Carter testified for 90 minutes. Her voice never wavered. When she finished at the JAG panel chair, thanked her, and Carter nodded once and stood and walked out of the room with her spine straight and her chin level and the particular dignity of someone who has finally been allowed to tell the truth in a room built for hearing it. On the second day, Andrea Simmons testified, and she brought the notebook, the physical notebook, the one she had written in on the night of March 17th, with Harrington's exact words recorded in her own handwriting. She read the words aloud into the record, and the room was so quiet you could hear the ventilation system in the ceiling. When she finished reading them, she closed the notebook and looked at the panel and said, "I wrote those down because I knew someday someone would need to hear them. I'm glad that day is today." On the third day, Sarah Yuen appeared via secure video conference from Austin, and she testified for 2 hours and 12 minutes. And Captain Marcus Webb testified immediately after her in person. And when the panel chair noted for the record that Webb's original JAG assessment had been formally submitted 3 years prior and had been overridden by Colonel Draper. The silence that followed was the kind that occurs when an institution recognizes formally and on the record that it has failed someone and tried to hide the failure. On the fourth day, the panel deliberated. Cole Harrington, on the advice of counsel, had submitted a written statement. He did not appear in person. His written statement acknowledged that certain interactions had not met the standard of professional conduct expected of a senior non-commissioned officer and expressed regret for any harm experienced by personnel under his command. He did not use the word assault. He did not use the word coercion. He did not use the words that would have accurately described what he had done. But he acknowledged something in writing, which is more than the previous 6-day review at Fort Baxter had extracted from anyone. The panel's determination was delivered on a Thursday morning, and Madison was in San Diego when she read it, sitting at her desk with coffee that was actually good, and she read the determination twice to make sure she understood it fully. Cole Harrington, administratively separated from service, with forfeiture of retirement benefits. Formal findings of misconduct sustained across 7 of the 10 complaints. The remaining 3 complaints formally noted in the record as credible and unresolved pending further investigation. Colonel Raymond Draper, referred for formal investigation into his conduct as reviewing officer in the Baxter proceeding, with specific focus on the adequacy of the 6-day review and potential conflict of interest. Voluntarily placed on administrative leave pending outcome. Captain Reeves' formal reprimand transferred required remedial training. Sergeant Aldrin formal reprimand administrative duties reassigned required remedial training. Colonel Bridges formal counseling noted for administrative failures, but not subjected to disciplinary action pending his cooperation in the ongoing Draper review. And at the bottom of the determination in the formal language of military legal process that was not designed to be emotional, but somehow was a formal acknowledgement that the complaint system at Fort Carver had failed to function as designed, that complaints had been improperly diverted from the formal process, and that the institution was committed to a review of complaint handling procedures across the regional command. Madison set the document down. She thought about what she had said to Bridges the morning after Harrington left the base, that the institution you serve cannot function with integrity if harm is allowed to remain invisible because the person causing it has an impressive record. She thought about the corporal in Portland, James Wyatt, who had sent back his statement forms at 11:40 at night and who was now part of a record that said formally and permanently that what had happened to him was real. She thought about Emily Carter saying she used to be the person who reported things. She thought about Daniel Brooks saying the room got bigger. She picked up her phone and called Carter. Carter answered on the second ring. "I heard," she said, before Madison could say anything. "Someone texted me from base, I heard." "How are you doing?" Madison asked. A pause, not a long one. The pause of someone taking stock. "I don't know yet," Carter said. And then, "Yes, I do. I think I'm okay. I think I'm actually okay." Her voice was quiet and steady and absolutely genuine. "It's not everything. I know it's not everything. He gets to keep his record up until 7 of 10, and Draper might get away with, I know it's not perfect." "It's not perfect," Madison agreed. "But it's real," Carter said. "It actually happened. It's in an actual document that actual people had to sign their names to. That's different from nothing. That's very different from nothing." "Yes," Madison said, "it is." She thought about something First Sergeant Keller had said to her on the second night when she had stood outside the administration building after Harrington had come back through the south gate, that he had been watching good people protect bad ones for 23 years, and he was very tired of watching it happen. She called him next. "I read the determination," Keller said. He sounded for the first time in 4 days like a man who had slept. "What do you think?" "I think it's a start," he said. "Not an end, not everything it should have been, but a real start." He paused. "I've been here 23 years. I have watched things get started and then stop. I've seen starts that went nowhere, and another pause. This one feels different because of the number of people, because of the paper trail, because of the fact that it's in the formal record now, and the formal record is public." A pause. "Because somebody actually showed up and did the work." She thanked him and ended the call and sat for a moment in the quiet of her office. The work was not finished. Draper's investigation would take months. The review of complaint handling procedures across the regional command would take longer. James Wyatt's formal statement would be part of a file that would still be active next year. The young female intelligence specialist from 6 weeks ago, Specialist Rivera, who had walked through a door at the right moment and told the truth in a room full of official witnesses, would need to be checked on, supported, made sure she understood that the thing she had done was not going to cost her what it had cost others. The work was not finished. It was never finished. That was the nature of it. But Madison looked at the determination on her desk, 237 pages of documented truth, given the weight of institutional acknowledgement, and she thought about what the work actually was beneath all the files and phone calls and legal pads and hours in rooms that smelled like institutional coffee. It was this making sure that the people who had told the truth in the face of every institutional pressure not to, did not end up being wrong to have done so. Making sure that the choice to speak, file, to document, to show up in a hallway and say 2 sentences even when you were afraid, making sure that choice landed somewhere it could not be erased. It had landed. 11 people had told the truth, and an institution had been required finally to write the truth down beside theirs. That was not everything, but it was real, and it was permanent, and it was the only thing that mattered when all the rank and all the reputation and all the carefully constructed silence finally ran out of room to hide. No uniform makes a person untouchable. No rank writes its own accounting. And the truth told often enough by enough people who refuse to let it disappear will always outlast the silence built to contain it.